Shep. What's your real name?
Justin Shepige.
Cool. So how long have we known each other for?
How long have we known each other? Oh boy. I'm going to guess almost 10 years. 2016?
Wow.
2017? Because I met you through my roommate.
Yes.
And that was around that time. Not that we didn't interact a ton in the beginning, but I definitely remember sometime around there.
Yeah. I'm trying to I got this app called OBS Blade and it's not working. It was free. So I was hoping to be able to control the stream on here.
Is that like an official OBS thing or just like a third party?
It's like it's a third party. It's not quite bootleg, but it's yeah, it's made by one guy, which is always, interesting. So I'll just, if I want to change shots, I'll have to run up there and click the mouse. But tell me the instruments you play.
Well, bass is my primary, and I think without doing a big lecture on it, I'd say electric bass is probably number one for me, with upright being like a close second, because I do a lot of upright work. I have a nice upright these days. But I also learned, left-hand keyboard stuff. So like playing synth, or I have a couple Hammond organs at home, and I wish I could do the two-hand thing better, but at the very least I know how to play with the left hand.
Yeah.
And then, I did play tuba for a bit, so I can kind of do brass stuff, but I just kind of view bass as like a conceptual role in modern Western music, and it's kind of like there's a bunch of different things that can fill it, whether it's a synth or an electric bass or a tuba. So I do a lot of things with that just because I think it's kind of like a style of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, technique-wise, I'm definitely probably most proficient on upright and electric. And then, yeah, because I played brass when I was younger, I played drums for a bit, like kind of semi-professionally, which I'm not really a great drummer, I wouldn't say, but I thought it offered a lot of perspective as like an arranger and a composer, and as a bass player playing in a rhythm section, because there was a bunch of stuff I used to do on bass that I would get critiqued for, and then I started playing drums, and then other bass players would do that, and I wanted to throw drumsticks at them. So I learned, I was like, oh, and that's why we don't do that, and it's like, because it's just sitting in the other chair. And yeah, so I did play like saxophone for like one summer. I'm not really a woodwind guy though, I wouldn't say. And then the very first instrument that I started on actually was piano, like a lot of people. My parents put me on that in like second grade to try to keep me out of trouble. It didn't really work, but it did help with the music stuff. So, I have that. And then, a lot of people assume I can play guitar. I don't really consider myself to be a guitar player. I know some basic.
I don't think so. Let me check this. Sorry, guys. There. Let's try this one too. Yeah, I might have too many. It's sad. So I'm just gonna try one more time to reconnect here because it'd be kind of cool to be able to. Can't connect to WebSocket. Oh, I know why. I bet you it's this. I bet you it's my Wi-Fi. So I have the house is 60 feet away or something like that. And so sometimes, for whatever reason, my phone or this iPad, which I don't really use, there we go. That's cool.
Hook up to the wrong one.
Yeah, because we just got fiber installed, so it's such a good router that it just sort of reaches out here, but not really.
They're running fiber down my road finally, and I'm hopeful that, I don't know if they'll be able to get it up to the house because the poles don't go all the way up the driveway.
Oh, yeah.
They go halfway up. So we'll see about that.
So I should be able to, there we go. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So I can do that, and then there. Okay. So one of the reasons I wanted to to like talk to you, which was super short notice.
Yeah,
Thank you for
yeah.
doing.
No problem.
Is a lot of people that do audio posts, they start in music. I don't know too many people who actually just are like, I want to work on movies and TV shows or web series or whatever. They're like, they start out as beat makers or like composers or drummers, like that kind of stuff, and then they find their way to doing, audio post production. So I, it's interesting talking to you because you actually do music full time. Like it's not just a little, side hobby. Like you do it year
Yeah,
round.
I've managed to make that work in a basic way for me. Hoping to have more success as I continue to get older, But yeah, I mean, I'm not encumbered by having to have a day job and like losing X hours a week to like doing other stuff. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't only eat, sleep, and breathe music. Like, I work on my own cars and
Yep.
I have a house that I fix up. And if there's something I'm going to have to pay somebody like $80 an hour to do, I'm probably doing it myself. But I kind of feel like that kind of activity like works because I get to do it when I have downtime, when I'm not required to do a gig or a
Yeah.
rehearsal or do something. And then also because like for me, I like doing something with my hands to kind of mentally decompress so I can kind of structure my day. So I do a certain amount of music per day, but then I can do also other stuff to kind of like keep the balance, so to
Yeah.
speak. So that really works for me.
So what are some of the less, like if you were to break down where your music income is coming from percentage wise, like, live performing for your own band or like playing as like a, hired gun for other people's bands, like how would you break down the percentages?
That's a good question. Also, the percentages are going to be like skewed with the like living in Florida part of the year aspect of my life that has just ended. So
Right.
when I was playing in the South, definitely a lot more of that, the percentage wise, was coming from just performing and typically being a side man for like other people's projects.
Right.
So I was like getting calls for pickup gigs. And, in that particular area along the Emerald Coast there between Fort St. Joe and New Orleans, there's just a lot of tourism, and it's definitely a lot more like cover band kind of vibe. But you can make really good money without driving too far,
That's cool.
and you can gig very consistently because the tourism is so consistent. It's not uncommon to gig 7 nights a week, and it kind of felt more like a cruise ship gig on land, so to speak. But I was able to work with some acts that were doing, original music, and we weren't just doing like Eagle stuff or, I mean, like it was like nice to have some variety. But um, yeah, so to kind of break that down, like more to answer your question though, I would say like performance has been, I think, the bulk of my like tangible income.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've been trying to create other income streams. Um, but like really probably like 90% has got to be just performance at this point. And then, there's a lot of different types of performance. And like, I think I've been trying to always think about how to like conceptualize things because I feel like it's helpful to like break things down.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I think I've really divided it into like two main camps, and there's like music as a service where it's like you have a skill set, and like you're working in a trade, you'd be selling that skill set for like a certain rate.
Yeah.
And then there's music like you are a brand or you are the art. And so I think still a majority of my money comes from I'm a person that can like compose, arrange, or play bass well, and I can sell that skill that I've developed to people or as a service. But what I've been trying to transition more into is like the other thing, which is like I'm a brand, or it's like me, the artist, or like my projects where like I'm booking them and I'm selling tickets, and people can find my stuff online and they can like pay for it because they like what I'm offering.
Sure.
And so I'm trying to transition more into that because I think there's a lot more creative freedom with that, and I think there's like a better like long-term outlook on what that is because I feel like especially since the pandemic, the music as a service and with all the stuff online and the cultural shift, it just feels like that area continues to contract.
Yeah.
So you can always just be better than the next guy, and like that's obviously a great strategy to get work, but it really sucks when it feels like the pool's been like shrinking little by little.
Yeah.
Um, so
So it's interesting because, like, there's a lot of the discussion that I find with people is AI, like what AI is going to replace. Like there's
right,
AI songwriting. I haven't played with any of them, but like there's obviously AI vocal transformers where you can sing terribly and it makes you sound like Drake or whatever. And then there's like AI music arranging software that will actually generate instrumentals, which still sounds pretty bad, but just the advances in like the past year or two have been pretty good. Like it's going to keep going.
it's gonna accelerate.
But
Yeah,
live performance, like going to see other human beings playing music, I think, that's not going to be replaced unless you're talking like Five Nights at Freddy's or like the Chuck E. Cheese animatronics where,
which
but like
could be
real
cool, but
skilled playing, you talked about you can be better than the next guy. And if somebody's willing to put in the hours to do that, then you may have, you know, a path to sustainable income if you're in the right area. Like Florida is a good area for that. Places where people are flocking for entertainment would be good. But like
yeah, and like
here,
culturally speaking, just the South in general values live music in a different way than other areas of the United States.
yeah.
No, I agree with that. Like, I think there is something particular about like the humanness of it
Mm-hmm.
that isn't going to be replaced anytime soon. I think what the struggle is there's so much like middleman and like fighting about things, and like I can say that at least with like what's going on here in Oregon, it just seems like the PRO organizations have done a lot to remove live music from the local communities,
Right.
and and I'm not sure, I won't put any names on anything, but like a certain PR organization has been targeting certain restaurants I used to play at in my local area, and they've taken the stance that when the pandemic happened and restaurants shut down and they weren't open at all, and they also clearly didn't have live music. Now they're open again and they want to return to live music, but a certain PRO has been taking the stance that they owe all money back payment until March of 2020. And if they don't pay that, they're not allowed to renew their license or start again. They have to pay back. Like, which to me doesn't really make a lot of sense because they can't have had live music because the restaurant wasn't open and nobody was like allowed to be playing gigs anyway.
Yeah.
And that was for like a much longer time in Oregon than it was in Florida. Florida, I think, shut down for like a month and then they moved on. But here it's like to pay for like a year and a half worth of licensing fees where you clearly couldn't have even had the product. I mean, that doesn't make sense, but because they hold the rights and they're demanding a certain thing, it's like they're just not allowed to have live music yet.
Yeah.
And at some point, I like to think that they would cave and just be allowed to do licensing from then on. But I don't know if the strategy of those organizations is really to support like live music in a local sense. I have a suspicion that like not having as many local venues might drive traffic to like bigger shows where they actually do make a profit. Like if you don't have a lot of awesome local bands in Lebanon, are you more likely to spend a couple $100 and go to the Moda Center in Portland or whatever
Right.
it's called now? Is it,
Yeah.
they might have changed the name again, but and that sounds a little conspiracy theory esque, but like I can't really figure out what the angle is for them to be consistently charging fees and rates that don't make sense for local businesses, and then taking the stance of, well, if you don't pay us, then you don't get to have music, and then a lot of people just choosing not to have music at all.
Right.
And then technically you can have, you know, like original music. And I know a place that was doing that, also local, that ended up in about 2.5 years of lawsuits over it. And they had bands sign contracts and only did original music. But like, when you're accused of doing something, whether or not you're innocent or guilty, it's like you still have to go to court and go through the process.
Yeah.
And they had to do all that and spend all that money and all that time. and I believe they did end up winning, but it's just kind of like that becomes kind of tied into that crappy part of the American litigious system, which
Yeah.
is like if you don't have enough resources to fight it, then it's better off that you don't mess with it at all because you're just going to be. I mean, what local business owners do you know that generally have the time and finances to like be stuck in 2.5 years of court proceedings? Like,
No.
it's like people they're trying to like make ends meet, and like it's this has not been a great time for restaurants historically speaking. It's like the margins just are tough right now, and I will say that maybe that's kind of my thinking on the overall thing is like, so I think human players playing together and people coming to watch live music, there's like a really magical thing about that. And from the performer's perspective, I was always taught that like part of my job, you know, in presenting what I'm doing is to like share the joy of being alive with those around me. So when people come out to my shows, it's like I'm here to do something I love to do and I'm here to share it with you and kind of take you on this musical journey and like showcase these things and convey emotion. And I think there's a ton of nuances to that even if you use live players in the recording thing, when you're playing back the recording, it's just not really the same as being there in the room,
Yeah.
hearing people, especially when you think about like how every person is their own point source. And if you're in a room, it's like, things just sound different and they feel different, and that's really important and that's really special. And but so much of those spaces are tied into other industries. That's just how it's been set up
Yeah.
in America. So like when restaurants aren't doing well, often we're not doing well because it becomes harder to find places to play, or the places that used to pay a certain amount despite inflation going up. Like whenever inflation goes up big time, like we saw during the last 2 years, a lot of the places that I've played, it's like if anything that they're trying to pay less
Right.
because they're hurting.
Their margins are so low.
But it's like my cost of living has also gone up. So if anything, I need more, and it becomes that's where the like supply and demand thing really comes in. Like, what kind of leverage do you have? And then it kind of when that kind of income starts drying up, then it really becomes like, can you put your money where your mouth is? Like if you book a show, can you bring 100 people that are willing to pay money to see you instead of just relying on the restaurant?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like, again, why I've been trying to transition more into selling what I'm doing. I think everything's just trending towards like a DTC model. I don't know if you can comment on that in your side of the production industry, but it just seems like, you have this thing going on here, right, where you're teaching people and you're putting out content, and it seems like being able to like reach them directly on YouTube is a valuable thing, and it can represent like a chunk of what you're doing now. Whereas like some of the older models of like work in the industry, get your union job, get your royalties, like it's like some of that's breaking down to some degree. And I feel like at least on performance I see that, where like some of the old ways of like building wealth throughout your career, like I don't know like anyone who's making money on streaming.
Oh yeah.
It's just like, you bring CDs to your show and sell them. It's
You
like
make more.
yeah, you have to like find the person that actually wants to buy your thing.
Yeah.
Whereas like the streaming, if I were to categorize it as a performer, which I haven't really, I've been super anti-streaming just because of the way they treat performers. But like I have realized it's hurt me a little bit because a lot of bands are like they're paying into a system to get a certain amount of numbers, and then they use those numbers as like a resume thing on their business card to like
Yeah.
leverage bookings, which I think makes sense, but you have to pay money to do that, and now bookings don't quite pay what they used to, even compared to 5 years ago. So it's like you're paying money to like compete for less money,
Mm-hmm.
I guess. So it's just kind of a really tricky situation on the performance side because everyone's trying to one up, and then that also brings into the thing of like people that are doing stream farms and buying followers and that stuff. I would say don't do it because if you get caught doing it, it's going to like shut down your page and stuff like that. You don't want to lose everything you've worked for, so that can be risky. But even then, if you pay a bunch of money to get like a bunch of followers that are like in some third world country that just get on and like, you're still like when you go to a show, they're not going to be there.
Right. Yeah.
Like if you have like 20,000 followers and you use that Instagram number to like leverage a booking at like a theater,
Mm-hmm.
and then no one comes and buys tickets, the theater, I mean, they're going to notice, right? there's not a ton of point in doing it. The only thing I could think is if you wanted to have fake numbers to like leverage a booking at like an established music festival, but I would just imagine that the people running that could like look at your page and within 5 seconds figure it out. It's not
Yeah.
that hard. So, there's a lot. We could talk more about that. I don't know how deep we want to get into like online numbers and what they mean, and like, because it's like, it's all kind of like fake internet points,
Right.
but like you can leverage fake internet points as like, look at how popular we are. You want to buy this because we will bring people to your real place of business that will spend real money.
Yeah.
So like there is value to it, but depending upon how you get it, where they're coming from, and like what you're able to demonstrate in real life versus what you're able to demonstrate online. I mean, a lot of these places that are booking bands can only afford so many like miss shows. It's like they have to have certain shows be well attended that make money, otherwise they're not going to stay in business as a venue.
Yeah.
So,
Can we go through some comments? I'm gonna see if I can
oh yeah,
make this bigger. Sorry, you guys are gonna get to see my body so close, but
I forgot about the
think
comments.
I can't. I don't think I can quite read that. Maybe I'll just read them to you. Okay, so let's see.
I think like before I got stabbed in my right eye, I could read them from here, but
Uh, Kevin says, I'm all for artists getting their money, but BMI, ASCAP, and the like are horrible. They absolutely RAPE the venues.
yeah, and so does anyone want like a quick and dirty explanation of what like how you're actually supposed to get money back from PROs? Because like I understand how to do it, but I've actually personally not signed up with one, and I have not done the process.
Let me just go through, let's just go through these first. Let's see. This is 100% transition I've been going through with music sound. Longtime DIY musician, composer, engineer. Got interested in post 6 months ago. And then this Ascentus says, it's cool AI could fill in small gaps like that, but I don't like the idea of it completely replacing humans. In film, that will eventually happen. It will get extremely good at the while process. So we should talk a little bit about royalties, and since a lot of people on my channel are into like film, I can talk a little bit about TV royalties, and maybe you could talk about like streaming royalties, because that is like,
I'd love to hear more on your side of the street on what's going on with that, and like where like if you're gonna put effort into it, where are you gonna get it back? Does that make sense?
delicious. This is from a local bakery. So when I first moved to LA back in 2008, I was like, music. I'm gonna go there and do music. I have a bunch of crazy stories where I like broke into studios. One of them, like, I think BB King was playing at one of the studios that I broke into. It was Sonora Recorders in
So you just like
Los
hung
Feliz.
out back until you found the unlocked
Well,
door.
I found out the studios, you could always tell they were like brick. They had ivy coming up the walls, no signage, just the address, like 2917, you know? And so this one, I saw gear being packed in, and I had my resume printed out, and I saw like a nice amp go in and a bunch of guitar cases. I was like, all right, they got a session. So I just walked onto their property because the gate was open, and I would always look for the doors with the butt cans for cigarettes, because that was like always unlocked.
Right.
So I went in there, and it's a labyrinth. I'm like trying, and I hear this guitar solo, this blues guitar solo, and so I go down the hall, and there's the control room, and there's like a producer. She was like tall, dark hair, thin as a rail. There was an engineer, and then I'm pretty sure it was BB laying down a guitar solo for something in the live room. And I had my resume, and I was like, all right, I got 15 seconds to slap it down on the desk, say, here's my resume, let me work for your studio. And as soon as I came in, she just spun around and was like, get the out of here, and like screaming and everything. I probably ruined the take, but I initially moved down there to get into like music. I didn't care too much about audio
performance or recording.
No,
or just...
record. I wanted to be a recording engineer, and I wanted to be a composer.
Okay.
So that side of the business. And so I had hip hop beats, and I had other weird, it was all instrumental stuff. I had a whole bunch of tracks that I had been working on. In the studio I rented down the hall from me, there was a guy who owned a music library service that would like curate these tracks and then put them on TV shows. And he was in with MTV, all their like Robin Big and um, Fantasy Factory and like not the Jackass shows, but like the later ones like Wild Boys and stuff like that. It was all library tracks just dumped into their editing program to fill 42 minutes of footage or whatever. And so I got some of my tracks placed with him. They got placed on TV. I still get royalties from ASCAP for them, but they're like 2 cents. Like it's nothing. And those are from shows that were made 15, 16 years ago. Nowadays it's even worse because of all the streaming content. Like
Right.
composers get a flat fee to score a show and usually that's it. Like their royalties after it goes on Amazon Prime or Netflix, there's nothing.
Now, just to remind everyone, the big dividing line here, right, is that if you're talking about audio only stuff, there are mandatory legal mechanicals, right?
Yes.
Whereas when you involve video, sync rights or whatever, it's
Yeah.
like you could have an agreement that it's 500 a showing or it could be zero, and it just
Yeah.
depends on who you are and who holds the rights and who's doing the negotiating, right? So,
Yeah, and then there's like there's the writer's share and the performer's share, and it gets complicated really fast. And I'm sure like you being part of a band, it's even more complicated when you have like 11 or 12 guys in a band, right?
yeah, I mean, it hasn't been so far, but it certainly could be. I think the whole process just can be complicated because of how many um, different things people can hold the rights to. So I heard a story about a venue in Corvallis years ago, and I think this was like before I even moved. But right when I moved to town to go to school for physics, that like a bunch of venues had kind of like dried up. They were doing music, but then
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden something happened, and like they wouldn't even let you play there for free. They like
Oh
weren't
wow.
interested. Like no live music was kind of like the move. So like half the venues seemingly went out or like were on the outs like right as I was kind of like stepping into the community. And I heard from somebody that claims to have been there that in one of the venues downtown there was a woodwind quartet doing a Bach piece. And of course, we all know that Bach is in the public domain. All the stuff he wrote way before any of the copyright
It
laws.
was at least 75 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and anything pre 1926 just was inherently in the public domain. Um, but the arrangement they were playing that somebody arranged for quartet was technically in a library. And somebody from a PRO showed up with a camcorder, got it, and was able to like prove that they were playing a licensed arrangement of a public domain piece, and then that venue got like thousands of dollars in fees.
Oh wow.
And then when everyone heard about that, they just kind of like were like, okay, well, if we can't even like put public domain stuff and maybe still get, it was like everybody got scared.
Mm-hmm.
And fear matters in this sense. But I think that's a great example of like, like with my band recently, I had a cover of a Eagles tune that got struck from YouTube, and I own everything to do with that except the actual original compositional rights, because it's like we did our own arrangement. It's very different from the original. We recorded it ourselves. Like everything that you could own a right to except for the original song itself was owned by us, but we don't own the rights to the original song. That's still under copyright, and because we post it with a video, there's no mandatory mechanical thing allowing you to do that. It's like that you have to get explicit permission and an explicit deal with the person who owns the rights to the song in order to sync it with the video. Now, I
Right.
could still release the audio and then pay the like whatever cents it is per thing, but I can't do it with the video. And if you do that too many times, they remove your channel.
Yeah.
So you gotta be careful with that. Which shut because most of the people don't strike your video; they just put like a claim on it, and if there's monetization, then it doesn't go to you, which I think is fair. But I think is it Don Henley specifically that's like enraged or something? Like he's just striking everything just to do it. I'm not sure But you know that kind of stuff is really interesting to me. That there's so many different ways you can hold rights, and then I don't actually know. I feel like with the performer thing, like I'm in a band in which I have a written contract of a certain percentage of royalties for the album we did, and it was like after all debts had been paid, it would be from there forward I get this percentage because of my contributions like as a performer. But that's an explicit written thing. I think just playing on somebody else's album or just playing on somebody else's composition, by default you don't get anything necessarily. Like I
You
think
have to fight for it
yeah,
if you
I think
want
you
it.
have to prove things or you have to get some sort of written thing. It's not like if I write a song and then I publish it, like I just inherently have the rights, and if somebody uses it, you know, like it's mine, whether or not they use it, you know. But so
Yeah, usually for studio musicians, it's a buyout where like you get paid and like that negates any writer's share of the performance. But people who are like really bringing a lot to the table,
they
um,
have leverage, right?
yeah, they can say like, hey, you know, this is a you did like the vocals and I did the drums, guitar and bass, so let's do 50-50 because the vocals are, you know, they're like usually people would say more important than the instrumental. But yeah, so you were talking a little bit about royalties, like what have you seen from like Spotify, Bandcamp? Are you guys on Tidal at all?
Yeah, well, I did stuff through DistroKid,
Okay.
which just I think I don't know what number of streaming it is now, like 153 services or whatever. Um, yeah, so we're on all of them, at which you know we don't have a ton of content on. So initially it was just that video game EP we did. I had a really hard time with that one because we had a song that mashed up two songs,
Oh yeah.
and they didn't have like a split for the longest time. You couldn't do mashups like of covers and put them out because there was like their algorithm couldn't track it or something like that. And that finally changed, so I was able to re-upload it after all these years of not being able to and only selling it in person. But yeah, basically I haven't seen anything. I think like I pay money each year to like keep it on streaming,
Yeah.
and like ideally there's that break even point where like so many streams covers the expense and I get my money back. But it's just like I think so much of it now is you know, algorithm based. Uh, you know, I think I'm in the minority of people that still mostly use like a physical media player or like CDs or things like that. And I like having the album, and I do have some vinyl, and it's like I like having the physical thing, like reading it and then like playing the thing like in its totality, and like knowing that versus having like a curated playlist or something like that. But it does seem like so much of that is like playlist and algorithm driven that a lot, you know, that other person I recorded with, it's like I believe he's been hiring placements. I mean, it's like you can buy basically advertising to like get in to certain playlists so people hear your
Yeah.
stuff and then it gets more optimized. So it's like I'm actually not, other than just explosive virality, I don't really know how much money you have to put in before you actually start getting money out. I think like most things, there's another middleman involved, and they're gatekeeping stuff, and you have to pay money to get through certain hurdles. And then ideally, you'd put in your dues, and then you'd get some back. But it even, I mean, you've seen a lot of people at the top of the industry complaining about what they're not getting
Yeah.
for how many streams they're getting. So to me, I kind of wonder how much that is worth. And yeah, I can just say confidently, like I haven't ever got a dime in any of my accounts for streaming, and I don't know, which kind of was why I was like, oh, sync right's really the way I want to go. But I was curious when you did that stuff with LA, so like you get your stuff into that guy's library, you still have the basic compositional rights for the tracks that you did, but that person's library is dealing with all the licensing to the shows and stuff. So, I mean, is it just in that library for good now, or do you have the ability to like license it yourself, or can you pull it from the library?
Each library is different. With that one, which I don't even know if the guy is still in business. he told me like, kind of on the side, like you can do this in other libraries, just change the name of it, which is kind of shady. But generally, there'll be like either an exclusive contract where you have to pull it from other stuff, or it's non-exclusive, and they get a like the people that have the libraries get a pretty good cut. I think his was like 50% or something. So
And he does all the negotiation because he had the uh, contacts for the
yeah,
placements,
it's
and
all
right.
about connections. Like
Yeah.
he knew the people at MTV, and so he was that gatekeeper you were talking about. And nowadays, I've seen this where people pay for SEO articles on their tracks. Like they'll have a track or an album and it's not trending, it's not doing good. So they'll pay these websites to do, and I'm sure they're written by AI, like, X 800 plus words. So it's at the top of the algorithm and talks about like how great this new folk singer is. And here's their YouTube and here's their Spotify. And it's just like, it's kind of like the payola of the radio back in like the 60s where the bands or agents would have to pay the DJs to play their music.
Right.
It's like that. Like it's pay to play. So it's kind of, I think it's kind of a shit show if you're trying to just do music, and that's why like doing non-standard stuff, doing live performances, super important, and then sync rights for like shows is important too. And it'll be cool to see like what happens. I know like I just set up Atmos in here, and there's not a ton of Atmos mix. Like there's some Atmos mixes, but I think that'll be something that for a short period of time will kind of be like an extra, like, this is an immersive mix on this, so it is more about the experience of listening to it like people would when it was a turntable and you'd have to listen to like the whole record start to finish. We got some more questions, so let me
Yeah.
just
See what the
see
questions
what
are
they
about.
are. Let's see. Yeah, I'm blocking Shep. There we go. Okay. Let's see.
Should we both move up for questions?
No,
Or?
it's cool. It's dynamic. It's a raking two shot. Okay.
We just need that person between us that's spinning counterclockwise for the Michael Bay shot.
Yeah. Oh, this is a good question. While in the South, how many nights a week did you need to gig in order to do music full time?
Need to, or well, I think there's a better way to answer this question. So, I never lived in the South full time. I was only there for like 4 or 5 months, and then I'd come back to the Northwest because I'm from here. Um, but there are a lot of people I knew that were making somewhere between like $60 and $100,000 a year, and they didn't travel for music; they just performed, and most of their gigs were within, you know, for those that were really well established, like within a half an hour of their house. But for other folks, it was, for me, I was generally driving less than 2 hours, and often I was like quite close to where I lived. But I think a lot of people during the busy season would gig once a day, if not do a couple of doubles on the more popular days. Some people that did a lot of solo performances would get kind of burned out, and they would make sure to take 1 or 2 days off a week just for their own mental health.
Yeah.
But a lot of those, you could gig 5 nights a week at $250 or $300 a show, and you could do that like 10 months of the year at least, if not all year round. And then if you were like a side band like me and not just a solo performer, there were like wedding bands. There was like a lot of like outfits from like Atlanta and stuff that would
Mm-hmm.
come down and like do these weddings, and sometimes they would hire out. Like they need a really common one, because I did play a little trombone down there. And I never did these gigs, but I was aware of them. A lot of them would be like a band would come with a rhythm section, but they'd hire local horns,
Hmm.
and like that would be like you could be on that circuit. Most people I knew, there were quite a few people that had some really good church gigs,
Yeah.
and it's like the South obviously has a lot of that. So like you could get your every Sunday morning, whether it was CCM or gospel or whatever. There were a lot of people doing a lot of different stuff, and like that can pay pretty well. Um, but then, yeah, there's also a lot of people I knew that just had like brunch gigs on the weekend at like regular tourist spots. And that what was really cool about that area was a lot of places, like once you got established, they liked having you like this time, this day of the week, and it became like a dependable thing. So like you could have, Sunday through Thursday booked out as like, Sunday brunch I'm here, Sunday evening I'm here, Monday evening I'm here, and you know what you're going to get paid, and you know that it's going to be every week. And so in that sense, it was like a really great setup for a lot of people working in that area. And there are other areas that do similar things. That just happened to be where I was. But yeah, and it paid, for what it was, really good, I thought. And it certainly is that's a not like you're making plenty as a performer, like you supporting yourself. That's like a legitimate job.
Yeah.
Whereas like in the Northwest, it's much more seasonal. I get you kind of got to cram everything into the summer months. I've done good to set myself up like regular off-season things, but they just don't pay competitively compared to like what was going on in the South. But yeah, to answer your question, like it was kind of up to like because people had regularity and they had like competitive wage for gigs, it was kind of more up to them. Like some people I know were older and they only wanted to work 3 or 4 days a week,
Yeah.
instead of trying to get as many gigs as like. I think if you know me and anybody who's done the performing thing, there's at least a giant period of your career where like if you can physically do it, you'll say yes to it, because like you have to get as many, like you just it's not just getting the money. It's sometimes it's like the networking and the opportunity. There's a lot of situations where like you want those doors to open and they're only going to open if you're the one there, and so like you just say yes to it. And finally getting to a point where I can be like a little bit more selective about like what I want to be doing.
Yeah.
But like there's definitely, I'm going to say like minimum of 10 years where you just kind of have to like keep an open mind. And there were a couple times down there where I worked triples where like I had like 3 cities in a row and I do like a lunch, like an early evening and a late evening, and get paid, pretty well for each show. And it was like nice because they were usually like in a line, like you drive out and then drive back. And like that was kind of cool. Is that something I'd want to do all the time? I mean, not necessarily, but like I thought it was cool when I did it, and
Yeah.
like I would probably do it again. But I think there's a point where like people get burnt out on that stuff because it is a lot. It's like that's 3 setups, that's 3 different bands, that's a lot, So
Yeah. And it gets exponentially harder once you add like a significant other or some kind of family commitment, because you're just you could if you're like 20s and you don't have any responsibilities, it seems like you could sustain that for a couple years and have a pretty good time. But then once you add another person that wants to spend time with you, or kids even, like, did you meet any guys or gals who had families that did that, or was it mostly like bachelors and single people?
yeah, I'd say like most areas I've been in, it's like it's a younger demographic because that's who has the time and is like living cheap enough, where you can kind of do that. Again, because that area paid better than a lot of other areas I've hung out in, there were definitely people I knew that were like supporting their whole family off of performing and
Wow.
doing stuff like that. And so for them, they were kind of like on every gig they could be on because they like had to get the paycheck.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily like there's like a catch 22 on that. On one hand, I had a mentor who would always talk about that. Like, if you really want to do this for a living, part of it is making sure that it's your main focus and your plan A and not your plan B. Because, like, if the thing between like you and rent or you and putting diapers on your baby or feeding your kids is like whether or not you get this gig back, or you get the call back, or you get the next performance fee. Like you're going to do whatever you have to do to make sure you get that income, because like the stakes are high.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, like I think to some extent, like putting yourself in a position where like you have to do those things can be also toxic, because you can kind of end up working with like really unsavory people, or like playing music you really don't like, or just being in situations where you might be getting paid well, but you're working with people that are just frankly not professional.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that is the gig. You just got to show up and like be the person in the room with the experience, and everyone else is just kind of like mucking around, and you don't know how they got the gig in the first place, but you're there. So I think, again, I think it's like stages of growth, right? Like I think I would definitely, if you want to know what it means to be a professional musician and to have some level of performance income, like, and certainly before you go out and teach it, you should definitely put yourself in a position of feeling what that's like, and doing it, like committing to it, and understanding like what all of your time going towards that goal means, and only getting that paycheck means. That isn't necessarily something you want to be doing for 50 years. It just depends on like how far you get, and like what you're able to build for yourself, and also like what you really like to do. I think maybe one of the interesting things about music is like it's so broad in terms of like what you can specialize in.
Mm-hmm.
Even within performance, it's like what genre, what instrument. Are you singing and playing, or are you not? I mean, like, are you somebody who can read and you have this more technical thing, or are you somebody who's like doing a lot of songwriting? I mean, like, there's so many different ways you can kind of chop it up, but I think there's like a commonality in it, and I would definitely recommend, like I did that, and it's like definitely at some point, at least for a certain period of time, commit to doing that so you really understand what it means. And then I think often you will get rewarded, like different opportunities will open, and you'll also make different connections.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people that are higher up and doing this full time, it's like, everybody like says they want to do something. There's not a lot of people that actually go through like the full commitment of like showing up and doing the thing. And a lot of the people that have these connections, they don't just give them out.
Yeah.
They kind of got to like know not only that you have the skills you need to do it, but also that you have like the right temperament to be professional and dedicated and like get things done. And like I think I still struggle with that. Like I've been trying to really stay organized and like finish things. I have a habit of not finishing things.
Mm-hmm.
And the great thing about performance is there's like an immediacy to it. Like you have to show up and be at the gig. So like I'm always at the gig.
Yeah.
But when it comes to like recording and getting my own stuff done, I think I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and it kind of like sometimes bogs me down, where I'm like, I need to get more stuff released, but then I listen to it and I hate it, and then I want to redo it, and then you just kind of get stuck in a cycle. And I've been very good, I think, lately about getting past that. But I think there was a period of years where I just wasn't writing or getting anything done because I was so critical of like wanting the thing I put out to be the way I thought it should sound.
Yeah. And there's kind of a difference if you're doing stuff as a passion and it's your baby that you're working on, you can take as much time. There's no pressure on you to get it done. But if you're hired to come, play on a song, or like for me, if I'm hired to work on a show or a movie, I'm not the where the buck stops. The buck stops with the person hiring me. So there is like an immediacy to the completion of that. And I think one thing people can do to get past that is treat themselves as the producer, whether it's a music producer or a TV producer, a film producer, and like their responsibility is to finish the project, have it be good, and have it be on time and on budget. So if you set like, it can be arbitrary, but goals like, hey, this is a passion project, but I'm gonna give this much time, and when I get to that time point, it's done. Then that does open you up to getting throughput, which is where, like I've seen people like that where they've got hours of recordings on their hard drive. Nobody's ever going to hear them. because it's not perfect. They could just overdub this thing, or they flub this note, or the mix isn't right, or it's not the right time, and like there's so many of those people that they just have stuff sitting on a hard drive. I think it's important to like just commit to just getting stuff 90% and then move on. The extra 10% will take you 90% of the time.
Yeah, I think the way I've been thinking about it is like the only way to get better at it is by doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And like if you're, and I'm assuming in a mostly done situation, you could do that for a bit and not release things as long as you're going through all the motions and like getting the experience. But there's a point where like if the experience isn't building to something
Right.
and you don't actually ever release anything,
Yeah.
and you've learned all these lessons but you still don't have a product you can point to, I feel like I've been on a really long journey with recording my own band, and the most recent two attempts are like attempts that actually are going to see the light of day because like enough things were done right and enough playing was done right, and I have the ability to do the editing, and I'm really committed to like having a timeline for that now, which was really tough for me when I was traveling back and forth to Florida. I think it just like mentally it's very hard to like have a long-term goal when you're like performing in one place and then performing in another place
Yeah.
and going back and forth. But now that I'm not going to be doing that as much, at least this year, I'm just looking at it as like, yeah, I have to get these things done, and yeah, I have to wear the producer hat and be like, and not get hung up on having something, the perfection be the enemy of progress, or like
Yep.
whatever those. I'm sure we've all heard the adages, but I also am trying to think like, yeah, part of this conversation is like, there's a whole nother aspect to my performance career I'm now trying to monetize. I'm thinking like, well, I'm going to release this recording with these originals, with this band and this arrangement, and I want to be able to, put all this on a website and show what's capable in terms of composition, arrangement, and recording capabilities. I also want to use it to book more performances to continue to grow the performance aspect, which has been my primary source of income. But I'm just kind of thinking, like there has to be a way I can set this up to really broaden the monetization base. And again, part of it I think is like, instead of thinking like, oh, streaming might make money eventually or streaming will save me, it's more like, how do I directly find the people that are gonna like have an engagement with this, that appreciate what's going on here, that see the skill sets, that we can have that relationship. Because I think, one person giving $25 because they really like what's going on and the information being provided, I mean, how many streams is that even?
Oh yeah.
It's just like an
It's
insane
yeah,
amount. Like,
thousands.
exactly. So I think, if there's maybe one general takeaway would be, it's so much of it is about direct connection. Whether it's if you're an artist and you're trying to sell your art, it's about having fans and direct connection that way. But if you're doing music as a service, or if you're working in industry more like Tom, it's like it's really about knowing the person who has the work. And as a performer, it's like your venue relationships. You really need to like maintain relationships with venues. So not only that you're personable and you have a good relationship in that sense, but that when they have you come in to do your music, that they know that they're going to see sales. They know that there's going to be people there enjoying the music. They know that you're going to be on time and professional and do these things. And so like that, it really is an industry of connections in that sense. So like I always make sure for the venues that treat me well, that I do well at, I really try to maintain those relationships in a really positive way. But I feel the same way about like other band leaders that hire me, or
Mm-hmm.
people that need me to just come play bass. I really try to make sure those relationships are solid as well, just because, you know, it's like I think a lot of people forget how many people are willing to do your job
Yeah.
and that are probably just as good as you. I mean, and I say this knowing that some people seem to think that my bass playing is like doing its own thing, but even so, I'm like, dude, there's just so many people that you can hire that aren't me that can do this. And it's just like, in most jobs on bass don't need a lot of this particular skills I've developed in my own playing. It's just like a lot of the time they just need somebody to play bass.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, that's a very simplistic part. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just getting out of the way and doing something that's appropriate for the style. And you know, I think I would argue now it's like, you can buy like a $200 bass online, and with the right EQ, I mean, that is going to sound 97% of the way as like a fully professional multi-thousand-dollar rig that like somebody, it's like there's just so many things that you can do.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's always remember that you're replaceable. That's another thing I think about a lot, is that like I'm not ultimately that special. Like there's a lot of, the world will go on,
Right.
the world. So it's like maintaining those relationships has a lot of value to you in that sense, because like you want to be at the forefront of people's thoughts, or you want to be on the top of that call list. And part of that's having the skills, but part of it's just like being somebody that people can work with. I think there's a lot of people that, I don't know how much you see it on the production side, but definitely in performance, there are some people that like, I don't know if they've always been like that, or they just get like a taste of what it means to be somewhat successful, and then they lose their mind. But it's
Yeah.
just like you can't like work with them, It's like they're just not professional people. They just get like a huge ego about it, and they freak out. And it's like, man, I don't like having any of that on my stage, and I have a hard time working in bands with people that are doing that in front of me.
Yeah.
It's like that's a really rough situation. But again, if you're thinking about making money, sometimes you just keep your mouth shut.
Yeah.
You just keep your mouth shut and you just play the
Shut
gig,
up and play.
and then you go home.
Yeah.
And it's like you just do what is needed to be required. One thing I've been curious about, I don't know if we want to check questions again, but
Yeah, we can. But go ahead.
well, we could answer some questions and go to this. I was curious, like how much in your profession, like was optional in terms of like what I've seen. Like, so for those know my, I did not go to music school, but most people I work with have, and I would say I'm a fairly educated musician at this point. Like I can write big band and orchestra charts. I read music pretty well. Like I understand music theory technically, like in a pretty robust way at this point. And I have a good ear for all that too. And there are plenty of people I've worked with that don't know how to do any of that. Like they can't read or write any music. The best they can do is like kind of sing a part at me. And it's kind of like usually they're hiring me, and I come in and I'm like, what do you want? You want this type of thing? You want this type of thing? And it's just like I'm usually the person that has these other skills, but there's also like a huge percentage of the time where like those skills aren't needed. And if anything, it's like better I don't mention those skills, because like that level or that whole side of what I do just isn't needed in that context. So I've learned to kind of split that up, where some gigs I've been hired by bands where I have to show up and I have to play for 3 hours not knowing what songs we're going to play. Maybe they're covers I've heard, maybe the arrangements are different, maybe it's a bunch of originals. You just have to listen and play along, which I'd say on bass is a particularly challenging one,
Oh yeah.
because you really have to be able to hear leading tones to know what the next chord's going to be before it gets there.
Yep.
And if the song's well written, I can usually do it. Other times, like somebody writes songs in a different way, and you have to pick up on their writing style to know that like this actually doesn't lead to this, and you have to figure this out, or you have to like cover it up with a muted note so you can hear the next chord.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of different techniques I've developed as a bass player to do this thing, but it's because the average person won't give me music. If I'm lucky, I get a Spotify playlist ahead of time, which annoys me.
Even just chord charts. Like if you
Yeah.
just have chord charts with lyrics, it helps so much.
Yeah, and it's like, yeah, even the basic like Microsoft Word with some lyrics and chords, super helpful. Sometimes those are in the right key, sometimes they're not. Sight transposing is a very useful skill for those that don't have it, like especially on bass. It's like you don't know when that capo is going to come out when you're working with a
Yes.
guitar player.
That's why numbers, like people who learn numbers
I
usually
love
do pretty
numbers.
good.
I love numbers. Sometimes you're given charts not in numbers, and you just have to be able to read the chords, put them into numbers in your head, and figure out the pattern. Um, but yeah, mostly I was just wondering on with the engineering side, like, are there people that like can get that far and be hiring and making a decent living with just like not knowing how to do some like what I would consider to be basic
Oh
fundamental
yeah,
skills.
definitely.
Like and
There,
and like
yeah,
how do they? Yeah, I'm just because with performance, it's like I get it because it's like if you're the guy booking the gig and you wrote the songs and you're like singing and playing guitar or whatever, playing piano, you don't have to know anything. You just have to know how to do the one thing you know how to do, and then you can expect people to show up
yeah,
and figure it out. And that kind of works when you're the person booking the gig. But for those of us working as sidemen or professionals or wanting to like broaden our base, maybe that's the downside of the focusing on the art and the brand thing is maybe you're not challenging yourself enough if you're
yeah,
just doing your own thing and you never learn how to do other people's things. But, as someone who does both, it's like, yeah, I'm trying to transition to more of my thing. But like I spent a lot of time learning just doing other people's things or doing cover band things. I mean, there's so much education to be had doing that, and to know that you're hired to show up and do a thing, you better figure out how to do it. But, I wasn't sure what that looked like on the production side.
yeah. Like a good example is I have, even though I kind of gave up on music, which you're really inspiring that you can go and play and make money off of music. That's something I always wanted to do, and it was always just like a little like lunch money for me. But I kept some of that. Like you can see, I've got a keyboard and I've got instruments and stuff, and I kept that stuff kind of going in the background, knowing that the time might come where I could actually use it to make money. And it happened, I think four. No, it was longer. It was like 8 years ago. And if you're mixing movies, then you often get asked to improve the music, the composer's music, which they give you stems, and maybe a cue isn't working, it's too sappy or it's not energetic enough, and so the director or producer will say, "Hey, through the other cues and see if you can hack something together." So I got used to editing music on the fly and like maybe using the drums from one cue and then transposing the brass from another cue to like kludge something together. And so that gave me a sense of what music worked for different moments in films. And I got the opportunity where a director was like, "Hey, I don't have a composer for this project. Do you know anybody?" And I submitted a cue, and he was like, "Dude, this is great." Like, and he gave me the whole movie. And so I made, probably like 12 grand on that. And then that gave me the confidence with that first one where it's like I did a feature. Now I can start approaching these clients where like, "Hey, I know me as a mixer, but I can also do this if you want." And it got me, not like a ton of gigs, but enough gigs where the music started adding to like my yearly income. And it's nice to have the ability to do like mixing and production because you never know when somebody's going to ask for your opinion. Like you said, sometimes you just shut up and you just do your specialty. But if somebody's like, "Hey, this isn't really working, what can we do?" That's opens the door to like, well, maybe we add like a shaker, or what about this counterline to the melody, and then that can like segue into bigger responsibilities on stuff. So I think it's good to specialize and be known for that, but definitely work on your skills because having more variety and more hats you can wear just makes it to where you have different ways to make money. Like you perform, but you also write. It's kind of like that.
Yeah, and even like I was saying within performance, like I've toured with a country band, I've toured with a blues band. Like I specialize in jazz and funk, I would say, but like blue, it's like there's so many different genres of music out there, and I try to not limit myself. And I even have like different like rigs. Like if I'm gonna get like more of a type of music call, I like if somebody's just hiring me, and especially if they're not paying a lot, like I like to show up with like what I prefer and do more of my thing at
Mm-hmm.
this point because it's just like comfortable for me.
Yeah.
But like if somebody is calling me to do a certain type of thing, then like I'm always trying to be very conscious of like what that thing, and that kind of like ties into maybe like a broader thought where like I always come back to like the highest calling is the music, and everything is supposed to be done in service to the music. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like it's not really about me, it's not about what I want, it's about what the music is asking for. And so to come in with like more of an open mind and be able to like listen to what's going on and have those conversations with other professionals and then present ideas based on that like broader knowledge context. It's like I've always been of the opinion that like whether or not I like it, I'm always going to kind of sound like me.
Yeah.
like like I'm going to be in there somewhere, but generally it's like my job to be listening to what's going on around me and doing my best to fit into what needs to be done. And you know, I mean, cuz like the way I hear music, I assume is probably different than the way you hear music. And so like we're always going to have our own perspectives on that, but like there's definitely a lot to be said for like understanding if you're working for someone else, what are their influence? Like usually I'm asking questions like
Mm-hmm.
that, like, well, like who are you listening to, and like what are your things, and like where are you trying to go with this? Because then it really gives me a lot of context of like what to reference and how to add things, and you know, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for that. But again, it's like just knowing where the priorities are.
Yeah.
And some people get wrapped up with their own ego, like thinking they're the talent or this and that. And, you know, maybe they're right. But for people like me, it's like I usually have to work with somebody like that, right? So it's like really, it's about making sure that whatever the thing that needs to be sold is sounding the best it can sound.
Yeah. Let's see if there's more questions we could take here. Let's see. All right. Sync licensing is the only way to make reasonable money. The move from music as a service to music as a brand seems to necessitate removing a bunch of hats to focus on a narrower range of gigs. How do you approach this gamble of reducing income streams? Meaning, like, becoming more specialized.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I haven't, I don't necessarily have the full answer in that I'm not, you know, touring nationally under my own name right now. But let me put it this way, unless you have a really deep set of pockets going into that transition, it's like less about the narrowing. Like musically, you're going to narrow, like because you're going to work on what you want to work on
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to really hyper focus on that. But I would say you actually have to think more broadly because unless you have a production team and a marketing person, like now you have to know digital marketing on multiple social media platforms, and you
Yeah.
know, have to know how to do poster design, and you have to know how to like shoot and edit your own video, and you have to be able to record yourself unless you're paying a studio to do it. Like there's a whole bunch of things that go into like making your own art. And I would argue this is maybe like a bittersweet thing in the, at least in my side of the music industry. I think a lot of studios today are being propped up by people paying into the fact that they might be able to go live their dream writing their music or and maybe that's always been the case, but certainly a huge amount of income for like a given local studio from here to LA, I think is just people coming in with their band, like all their band members that work at coffee shops have pooled their money for 2 years to
Yeah.
come in and cut this album. And the sad reality is that album probably won't go anywhere. Like it, like 100 people are gonna buy it, their friends and family, and like it's they're you're not gonna be, you know, the next this or that. But it's like if you can learn those skills yourself instead of working a different job to hire someone to do it for you, then at least you have the skills.
Yeah.
And then as you get better at those skills, if you find out you have them, then you can start recording your friends. Now you can, now maybe somebody's gonna want to pay you to do it.
Yeah.
So like I've been taking this approach of like as I've been moving towards that, I've been trying. I taught myself a lot of video editing this year. I'm still very rudimentary at it. Uh, Through some guidance from Tom and just trial and error, like I've learned a lot about recording, and you don't have to learn necessarily how to be the best studio engineer, but you do have to learn how to record the sound you want.
Right.
And so I've really been focused on learning those skills because with music as a service, I have those skills and I'm selling those. And I haven't stopped doing that, but I think maybe I would judge my success by like the amount of gigs I take that I want versus the ones I have to take just because they pay.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I can get 100% of like, I said yes to this because it's something I want to do and I can make a comfortable living doing that, then like, I don't think there's a greater success in life. And I've definitely gotten better at having that balance. I think, when I was in my early 20s, so many of my gigs were just like, I took what I could get and I said yes to it and I did it because I needed to do it. And then now I can actually kind of more focus on stuff I want to do. But yeah, to that effect, I think you're narrowing in some sense, but like, again, unless you have this robust budget to have all these other people do stuff for you, you're actually going to need to like broaden your non-musical skill set. And another thing that we haven't talked about a ton is like booking.
Right.
That's something that maybe doesn't really come up in production in the same way it does with live performance music, but like just trying to reach out to venues and like get a gig. Like that used to be a little bit easier. Now it just feels like screaming into the void. It's like trying to get a venue to even respond to an email. To eat like it's like so then now you're talking about like the elevator sales pitch crammed into even less time in an email format because like you need to get in touch with somebody maybe that has never heard your band or even knows who you are, and they need to like glance at what you're sending and be interested in with like the first 3 seconds.
Yeah.
Otherwise there's 100 other emails guaranteed sitting in their box of bands that are trying to play at this venue because there's a huge imbalance like we talked about earlier. There's just less performance venues and there's a ton of people willing to perform, and so it makes it really hard to get paid and also just get placed. Again, I don't know if I have all the answers to that. I do pretty well booking myself, but there are people a lot better at it than me that probably have pretty slick courses that break down how to like format things. But again, part of it's just like keep coming back to this connections. If you know somebody, a lot of the best gigs I've got have been like somebody saw me perform somewhere, and because they heard the band, they actually emailed me, and then we were able to set something up. So don't ever look past the possibility of like just having your sound out there. Like generally my disposition as a performer is like if I had a free night and somebody called me to do something, I'd rather be out doing something than sitting at home doing nothing. And some people like won't leave the couch for less than a certain amount of dollars. I think those people are kidding themselves personally. Unless the only time you should be doing that is when you have like such a full schedule, you can start shedding like opportunities that aren't worth your time. But like if you have the time, you should probably be utilizing the time, and that's where the whole like family and like significant other thing comes in, and that can change your priorities. But if you're talking about just a career thing, something to think about.
Yeah. If you guys have any other questions, now's the time because I think we're gonna sign off. And do you, when we do that, would you play us out? Would you play some
Sure,
more
yeah.
bass? So
Are there any other more pointed questions?
not really. They're pretty generic, and so if I see any pop up, we'll read them. But
We might do this again with more of a focus.
I mean, this is good.
No, this
It's
is
cool.
good.
It's
This
cool.
is not dragging on this.
Um, the where so
Or
if
like what's the summary? What's the takeaway we can?
the takeaway is that you have to be kind of a chameleon, and I think unless you're going to be the big shot, artist, which is really hard without manufactured help.
Let me ask you this:
Okay.
how many people do you know that are working full time and like getting a good yearly salary that can do that level of speciality in your field?
Like what I do?
Well, no, like they only do like rescoring, mixing for film, or they only do their high end recording studio.
Oh yeah,
or
it's like a tiny handful of people.
yeah, I would say yeah, and the performance thing, like there's very few people that can only like they're them, they do this genre and they sound like this. Most of us have to like learn how to do a ton of different stuff. And honestly, it's getting to the point where even like it's sometimes even beyond the music. Yeah, like if I join a band and me as a bass player has like a somewhat robust social media following, and then like I can go to this show and like 20 people show up that wouldn't have shown up because I'm involved, the people that are hiring in the band are going to look at that and be like, man, we had a good crowd.
Mm-hmm.
And and if they can put two and two together and figure out like my involvement like help boost the numbers, like that's the kind of stuff people are like looking at. It's not just like you have to have that base level of like competence
Right.
in your skill. Like if you're going to show up to play bass, you actually have to know how to do that. But like beyond that, there's all this other stuff that can come into play, beyond just being dressed and on time and doing, you know, basic like hygiene. You wouldn't believe how often hygiene comes up.
Yeah.
It does though, and certainly if you're going to go on the road, one thing I've always heard from everybody is like whether or not you travel well with others. It's like such a like there are so many people that get a touring gig with a big act that aren't as good of a player because like they can sit on a tour bus and not talk about politics or something,
Right.
you know. It's
Yeah.
like so that's interesting, but yeah, but with the specialization thing, so I think it's the great aspiration. Like I think we should be aspiring to that, but like I would imagine that most people that I can think of that are highly specialized, or maybe the people working in your field, they had to like be broad at some point before they could like focus in.
Definitely.
I mean, the amount of like child prodigies that get selected and then they get, you know, it's
It's
like,
more nepotism.
yeah,
I've found like there's, I mean, rarely you'll find somebody who is just so good that they just shoot up to the top. It's more nepotism. Like my dad did it, and so that's their in, and they can specialize because the clout of a family member. You know, or
right,
somebody like taking them alongside and like basically sheltering them from the real world, and
yeah,
giving them like a cheat code for infinite money and fame and everything. So, but yeah, otherwise you do have to generalize, or you have to be willing to take on a lot of different tasks. You know.
do you think it's fun though? Because like
Oh yeah.
I like it. Like
Yeah.
I like learning a new thing all
Yep.
the time and being able to like add to the toolbox. I think some people feel encumbered by it, but for me, it's like ooh, a new thing to do. You
Yeah,
know,
I
like
love it.
I
Like
think it's
getting
great.
back into composing was really cool, and the fact that I approached it from I'm going to use guitar, I'm going to use bass, I'm going to use weird like contact mics on stuff and like mangle sounds, like treat it more like sound design versus let me write for a string section and then the percussion comes in and like orchestral or just all synth stuff. Like those I feel are just low hanging fruit. And there's so many people who can do that stuff. Like you really have to find like your bass playing, you have to find your own sound.
Yeah, and also on the composition side, like I would say like composing and arranging are strength, but like I'm a decent orchestrator and I'm pretty good at copyist work at this point. Just not because I'm getting hired all the time to do it, because within my own band, I found over the years through trial and error that like if I have a clean type of chart format that reads consistently, it just cuts down on rehearsal time.
Yeah.
And I don't want to have to call people to rehearse all the time. I want to be able to have one rehearsal once in a while where everyone gets together, shows up prepared, and does it. Because like I have a large band, and that's a lot of people driving and committing time to something I can't really pay a ton for.
Yeah.
But like, you know, I don't know personally like anybody who's doing like copyist work full time. I know they exist. I'm sure like the amount of jobs like that in the world are
Oh
like
yeah.
not.
It's probably like two guys in their 60s that are still doing it.
Yeah, I think so. Like when you think about like that level of speciality, it's just like I've learned how to do all that stuff for myself. And at any point, if I had an opportunity to get more income at any one of those things I mentioned, I would probably devote more time to it and become more specialized to
Yeah.
it. And I think you just kind of got to follow the thread.
Yeah.
So you like learn all these interrelated skills, you do your best at them, you do them at a level you need to produce yourself, your own art, and work in a professional community of your choosing. But as you continue to develop the skill set, like there should be people calling you if you're doing things right. You should get
Yes.
calls once in a while where
Yeah.
you can like have an opportunity to do this next thing, and then you just do your best not to blow it, and you try to get that, and then that could be like, okay, now I'm starting to get more of this type of gig. I can start specializing in that more. And I think there's just a natural progression to it, and whether or not, you know, the greater industry is shrinking and contracting, or like where's the money. I mean, those are all really important questions when you're talking about like your bottom line. But if you're talking about like development, it should really be more of like try not to focus too much on that and focus on the organic nature of like what's working for you. Like,
Yeah.
what are your skill sets? Are you going to work on what you're weak on and try to fix it, or are you going to try to focus more on what you're strong on? Like, where's the work coming in? And you know, there's nothing wrong with having like a part-time job that isn't music, but like I think again, the aspiration is like the more time you get to spend with what you love to do, the better you're going to get at it. And also know that, yeah, the people that are at the top that are specializing, like they only do this. And so if you're having to be, spending a bunch of time doing not music, then that's just hours a day that they're working on their skill set that you're not. So
Yeah.
it's like we're always trying to get to that point. And again, so like I feel very fortunate that I'm at a point where, like, for the most part, I'm just doing music. And if I'm doing non-musical things, it's like a distinct choice. I'm not having to do it. But that's still not an easy place to get to. So
All right, let's go through the last couple questions and then we'll sign off. It says, let me see here. That's it. Thanks, dudes. Justin, I followed you on Instagram. I'll try to catch a show if you come to Brooklyn. You
I
think maybe
I
at
have
least?
my wife's cousin lives in Brooklyn actually, so we
There you
might.
go.
I don't know when I'll be performing out there, but if I do some of the stuff we're talking about correctly, ideally.
Rodrigo says, do you guys use Fiverr? That is a great segue into, let me unmute this guy. So where can people find your, like, if they want to support you, how can they find like your music? Or I put a link to the website, Instagram, and YouTube channel, but do you guys have like Bandcamp and stuff where people can buy your tunes?
Yeah, and right now, for those that are paying attention, not a ton of offerings. In fact, that's one of the big things I've been trying to correct. And we talked about this earlier, of like people like not seeing the light of day. I've been guilty of that. So like I was able to make a living, just as a hired gun, and like I roll in. Even when I first moved down to Florida, I think it took me about 2 weeks to get a full schedule. Like people heard a new bassist was in town that apparently was decent, and then there was a need, so you get out, and I was working gigs, and I think that's like great. But I just realized that like I want more and different things out of my career trajectory. So like I could just focus on being the best sideman, hired bassist, and just keep working as many performances as possible, and maybe get picked up to go on the road, and do all of those things. And I'm sure I will keep doing that. But with my own projects, I realized I had just kind of neglected them because I
Mm-hmm.
was doing so much work for other people and traveling and doing those performances. And it's like, I don't think it paid good, but it didn't pay maybe as much as I'd want it to, if that makes sense. So like, it's not a complaint because it's just not easy to make a living performing, period, anywhere. But I'm just viewing it more holistically as like, okay, I'm 63 now. Am I playing down at the bar for $200? Like, what am I? It's like I'm trying to think like long term, like artistically, where do I want to be? So yeah, Tom put our links up. Um,
DTW is the name of your band.
DTW is the name of the band, and we have a bunch of stuff that is getting processed right now that should be coming out. We'll have a new album by summer. Um, we actually have some more Groove Members stuff. Tom's. You'll probably see this guy's name on a lot of the mixes actually, because that's one thing I've yet to master is how to mix stuff that I play on. I'm getting better at it. I'm way better at recording and getting the recorded sound I want, but it's like the mix is a little tricky because as somebody who runs the band and plays in it and arranges it, it's really hard for me to get out of the editing mode
Yeah,
because I just keep hearing people's playing
yeah.
instead of like how the stuff needs to sound in a mix. So yeah, look for all that. I think as long as those links are active, people can find it later and there'll be more stuff,
Yeah,
right?
but I'd say like, do subscribe to their YouTube channel, follow them on whatever, so that when it does come out,
It's
you
coming.
guys, and it might be kind of cool also if we do mix it here, maybe we could do some behind the scenes,
I would
like
love to, yeah, show some part of the process. One thing that I've noticed, and this is probably applies to a lot of people that subscribe to your channel, is there's a lot of people out there that are really good at mixing rhythm sections and vocals. And then there's a ton of people that don't know what to do with a live acoustic room or like a horn section. I mean, when you add in horns or like real strings, I mean, some of the stuff I've worked on, not my own projects, but I've been involved in, it's just like I thought the tracking was done really well. And then when you get to the final mix, it was like kind of a train wreck.
yeah,
And it's
yeah,
like because so many people are just used to like the home studio with like sampled drums
In a rock band
yeah,
setup,
plug in
yeah.
the bass and so if you can learn how to do some of this other stuff, there's a demand. There are bands out there like my band that are working this angle, but there are a lot of people that just they've never mixed a horn section.
Or take a live drum kit and not use sound replacer to replace the snare, kick, and toms. Like that's the
Yeah.
other thing is taking a live drum kit and embracing like the overtones on the snare and like the bleed and stuff instead of being like, nope, I'm gonna quantize and I'm gonna just replace these with like samples from a sample pack.
So that's something to think about for those that are looking to do more mixing. I think there's a non-zero amount of stuff out there where people are looking, and this could be recording philosophy, but yeah, just for people to know where I'm coming from. I am always viewing my recording sessions with my band as a way to capture what's happening in the moment. So it's live playing with real players, and I'm trying to get a recording setup and a sound and a mix that like brings that to life. Whereas like, you know, I think a lot of modern stuff is like you can like lay down a track and lay down another track and like build it in
Yep.
the studio. And I think that's a totally valid way to do it, but I really like humans playing with humans, and I'm really trying to develop a recorded sound, and the stuff we will be putting out is going to be reflexive of that, of like we want to sound like I want it to sound like you came to a live show and the band is just as good as live on the record. Either way, it's just people playing great.
Yeah. It's the worst when you go to a show and it's like one guy and he's got his iPad or laptop and he just like, all right, we're gonna go play on the backing track. Now you're gonna hear me do some horrible auto-tune rap. So if you could play us out, we'll say bye to you guys. Thanks for tuning in, and make sure you check out Shep and DTW, and we're gonna have some bass now.